Thank you very much, Commissioner. All of our speakers will be available if anyone would like to speak with them one-on-one, as we said, when our news conference is over. But if we can throw it open to general questions now, if there's anyone who has a question, or if not, again, we can do so afterwards.
What does this study say in the larger context of Kentucky as a whole? When you extrapolate from this study about the importance of agriculture statewide, or what would the general reader of this study statewide, what would they get out of this? When you're looking at one county.
Sure.
What does it say about in a larger context about agriculture statewide?
Well, you can't extrapolate much further outside of central Kentucky, where we're really trying to combine both the economic impact as well as the rural landscape. We just are finishing off the same type of study for Fayette Alliance, which we did, or in Fayette County, we did about 5 years ago, and their numbers are 1 out of, somewhere between 1 out of 9 and 1 out of 12. So it's a much smaller ratio, but of course Fayette County is much larger, and the denominator there is pretty gigantic. And I think the takeaway, did you get it? No. The takeaway is that this is I do economic development for a living, and so what we tell communities is that you capitalize on your strengths. You diversify your portfolio of strategies and industries, but you capitalize on your strengths. And the strength of this particular area is the agricultural cluster, the equine industry, and the rural landscape that's really in a city. And so would someone in Western Kentucky find this to be, something that relevant to them? Probably not, but I think it's a pretty large area of the state, and one that that type of theme shouldn't be forgotten as we do economic development strategies in the future.
How much does it cost to do this kind of stuff?
$4 million. It does vary based on the size, because what we do is we pan through directories of businesses. We have access to proprietary data, and we go through every single business. We go to their website to verify that just because you have the word thoroughbred in your name doesn't mean if you're thoroughbred limousine, it's not a bunch of horses taking you places. So really going and verifying. So it depends on the size of the city. The larger the size, the more expensive it is, but it's, it runs anywhere between about $10,000 and $50,000 or so. Or $4 million. If anyone is feeling particularly, yes, I would like a horse myself now, yes. Governor Cobb.
Well, I'd like to go with the Commissioner.
Oh,
Commissioner, you are well aware of our hemp program. And we haven't touched on it, but with a national administration that appears to be more favorable, and we're hopeful that that's going to continue to progress. Quite candidly, I want to go one step further, and a number of us in the General Assembly are beginning a thinking process to this end. And I want to change a word in something that is often put out there that's more accurate. I'm not going to say medical marijuana, because I understand the populace reaction to that word, when in fact it's nothing more than medical cannabis, as you well know. And so I want even our press to help us re-educate the public that when we talk about cannabis, it's only a product or a potential of the plant. It's not an enjoyment. Cannabis doesn't have that potential. We're looking forward to at least taking a giant step from a financial point of view, as you well know, over to medical cannabis. Now that we've already taken the step, as you well know, I led the fight with my chairman of the Health and Welfare Committee in the Senate for cannabis. And quite candidly, once we explained it to all of our members. Now, whether people know this generally or not, it was passed unanimously out of committee, unanimously by every member of the Senate, and unanimously by every member of the House. Those kind of things don't happen, but it did.
Right.
And quite candidly, we're trying to start a new educational product. Are we on the right track? And are we really looking, we need money in Kentucky. Not only in our farmers' pockets, we need it in the state treasury. And believe me, the states that have produced medical cannabis have got more money than they know what to spend. I just love your reaction. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I put myself already on the spot, but you see where I am. And what do you think?
You know a lot about this subject.
Well, I'm afraid I do.
Right now, the Department of Agriculture is focusing on industrial hemp. And I think it's a great crop that we can add to our growing list of alternative crops in our alternative crop portfolio. Proud to announce we'll have more acres of hemp this year than ever before. We tripled the amount of approved acres. And there's three main purposes, derived products out of that. You have obviously agri-fiber. We have a lot of growers making a run at fiber. We're starting to have conversations with our automotive industry about how they can use that. Number two is the grain. And that's being used from everything from makeup to protein shakes to ink. And of course, three is the nutraceutical pharmaceutical purpose with CBD oil, which compromises about 60% of our program. And there appears to be a link between CBD-derived products and helping those who suffer from epilepsy and seizures. I think Kentucky has come a long way on the educational forefront of educating the public about what industrial hemp is and isn't. And I think it's important for the Department of Ag to focus on industrial hemp, as well as CANAF, which is another fibrous plant, which is currently being used with Toyota and Ford products right now in our state, but it's being sourced out of the country. And I'm proud to announce we're also doing research right now at the University of Kentucky and Western on hops with our thriving craft beer industry. In 1950, there were 50 craft breweries in the United States. Now there's over 6,000. And hops used to be grown in Kentucky. A little thing called Prohibition put them out of business, but we're growing them again. But to answer specifically your question, as with other states, that is a topic that will be debated in their general assemblies. And I know that you and Senator Perry Clark out of Louisville have had some thoughts on that, and we'll be happy to continue that discussion perhaps over the interim.
Thank you.
Yep. And to follow up on your question, we just have a brand new publication off the press, a collaboration between the Kentucky Department of Agriculture and the Cabinet for Economic Development that talks about agriculture's economic impact statewide. And I have one copy here. I'll get you one as well. So it talks about that.
When I walk in, I said, in some cases, all the usual suspects are here. But what seems to be missing in the audience is our planning and zoning, and our local officials in our urban area. That would appear to be an audience that we should be talking to in comprehensive plans and road construction and bypasses and PACE or partial development rights programs. To me, the audience, we may know the commissioners, so we need to figure out some way that this study is exposed to our non-agricultural population in a major way, because that's going to be, they hold the key to the votes, and that's what I think that's our key issue, how do we get this pushed to the next audience?
Yeah, I've worked in this county on various topics for the last 9 or 10 years, and was a part of I think, Happy, you were at something I did about 8 years ago with some graduate students, and I do remember, there is a pretty significant divide between the two groups, and it's hard to get them both in the same room together. But you're right, this is a relatively, it's preaching to the choir, essentially, when in fact the decision makers, the ones who are deciding how to do zoning, how land use issues, need to be at the table. And we're actually, I didn't know this until last week, another one of my SEDC faculty is working to try to bring a couple of representatives from different sectors together, including government, land and zoning, to try to figure out how can this conversation occur in a meaningful, productive way. But I completely agree with you.
May I follow up on that?
Sure.
The problem that we're having, believe me, I've had some experience in this area, having been in the executive branch. As I attended a dinner at the country club on Saturday night, and I set the table with a bunch of engineers. And I made one general statement to them, and I asked them to respond to. I said, my problem with you guys is that I find you don't often use common sense, you use the book instead to see what the book said. The problem that Hoppy's talking about is our planning to solve problems in the area such as we have right here in Woodford County, is that our engineers are not really truly listening to a lot of the local people about what they want to preserve, and yet they are willing to try to resolve the traffic congestion because it's a major problem in the community. With a planning process that responsibly answers the questions. And quite frankly, I really need to communicate with Governor Bevan. He needs to get over there in the Department of Transportation and jerk a few, I'll stop there, and get them to be more sensible about their planning process in relation to local desires to preserve.
So the one thing
Have I hit the nail on the head?
So the one thing I'll say, and we were very deliberate about reaching out to the non-agricultural businesses, the manufacturers that are the largest employers, to really try to get their perspective. Because if they said, we don't value this landscape at all, well, then that would be a pretty telling point. They didn't say that. They did value it in terms of recruiting and retaining. They mentioned that the additional communication across sectors is necessary, and the labor supply is an issue, that there is some competition, that they feel as though those really hard-working ag workers would be really great in their factory. And so I think some preliminary conversations with other industry about how you approach sort of a more universal planning decision is really necessary and very timely. So I appreciate that comment.
Okay, I'll ask you a question. Seems to me that the development process in Woodford County is driven primarily these days by the Woodford County Economic Development Authority. And my colleague, Mr. Coker, had a nice profile this morning in the Herald Leader about John Sumner, the head of that group. Is anyone from the EDA here? Is there representation from the EDA? Maybe I don't need to ask a question, maybe I just make a point. I care about these things because I run a project in Midway where students cover the community, and sometimes we have to go to for sales and cover the planning function too. And I tell them before they come that this is the issue that has been number one politics in Woodford County for almost 50 years. And there does need to be more dialogue between various interests.
Piggyback on that, I'm curious as to why Mr. Soper or somebody with the EDA was not among the people that asked questions of, you interviewed several businesses that are around. I was kind of curious about why they weren't testimony.
That's a good question. We did not talk with any chamber members. We went strictly just to those businesses that made a decision to locate here and to understand that decision. But I think that certainly would be the next step, is to understand. And I think, a lot of regions across the state have decided that agribusiness and agriculture is now an economic development strategy, and that's a learning process. And I don't think they're in isolation of each other. It's just recognizing what that looks like and how you market it as being an actual economic development strategy. And so it's a totally valid point. I think that's a conversation that needs to occur, particularly in light of this morning's article. So future conversations are probably warranted.
I was particularly comforted by the idea that so many people are coming to Woodford County to work. There's a sentiment out there that maybe we're becoming or partially a bedroom community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that helps dispel that notion, because while a lot of our people do live here and work outside of Woodford County, you have commuters coming in to work And I think additionally, one of the things that we've done in Woodford County that wasn't directly mentioned, but I think has a huge impact, is the excellence we've been able to achieve in all three levels of our educational system, for our elementary schools, to our middle schools, to our high school. And when you have 90% of all your land prime farmland, and you're creating good ag jobs, you're able to save a middle school ag program when the ag community gets behind it. You're able to control housing so that you don't have a huge influx in one area or another and burden your elementary schools, or your middle school, or your high school. And we're going to face those challenges as we go forward. But I think that in creating the brand that is Woodford County, we are right to focus on ag development and futures in agriculture here.
Right, we did have a discussion with a firm that just moved here, and you all could probably figure out what it was. And so the conversation was very, couldn't have been more relevant or timely because they just made that decision. And we said, why? Why did you move here? And they said, we had choices between other places to go that were less expensive. The taxes were less, housing was less, land was less. But we valued very much the fact that the higher cost of doing business here paid for high quality education. And they did mention that they said that we're willing to pay more for better. And so that's in the report, but that's a very good comment, is to make sure that's recognized.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for the study. I think this is fantastic, and if we leverage it right, I think we can do a lot for the community. My question may be a little bit more specific, so I'm not sure if it covered it in the study or not, but do you just dig into the demographics of those workers in terms of age? I know Commissioner Quarles mentioned that the average age of the farmer is around 60, but for the workers themselves, and male, female, any of those demographics?
There is one table in there. We didn't do gender, but it's a table. It's called replacement demand, and so it basically controls for the age of the worker. And so it's identifying the predicted demand for workers over the next 10 years as you expect people to retire. And it is there are a fair amount of the ag-related occupations where you're expecting between 75 to 80% of the workforce to turn over in the next 10 years. We did not do gender, but I think based on that, you'd find that the age is, enough so that in 10 years you're expecting folks to be at that retirement age.
You have a lot of how important it is, but how do we keep it? How do we keep our farmers in business? How do we keep our prime agricultural land from becoming houses?
Mm-hmm. Fortunately, that would cost $10 million to do that, but I think that the purpose of the study is to re-energize that conversation that is really critical, because you're at the absolute forefront of being a community that could go into tremendous growth, commercial, residential, that might bring in significant tax revenues and jobs and so forth, but it would then eat away at that kind of brand of the community. And so it really behooves the folks here to have that conversation and find a way. We're always happy to facilitate that. We've started doing that with one group last week about trying to get at some of these underlying issues and how can we have this productive conversation. But it is. All the people who are here. Yeah. Okay, Andrew. Okay.
I guess I will wrap up our questions at this point. Again, our speakers will be available for questions if you would like to speak with them afterwards. And I'd like to thank you all for coming, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.